everybody. John Iadarola for the Young Turks. Yesterday on the show, we were talking about the fallout from the feud between Congressman John Lewis and Donald Trump, which was spurred in part because John Lewis said that Trump was not a legitimate president, but also when he announced that he would not be attending his inauguration, saying that he could not stand by and simply represent with his presence that he thought something was legitimate that he believed was not. And we didn't actually get to the follow-up story from that was that this boycott of the inauguration is rapidly spreading. And so I want to talk about today, because it's actually bigger than it was on yesterday's show. We had, I believe, 30 representatives had already pledged to not go to the inauguration as of yesterday. That is now past 50 Democratic members of Congress, which is a significant portion of all of the Democrats in Congress have now pledged that they're not going to go. Still no senators as of the time that I'm live streaming this, but that's not impossible. We can't rule it out. And I know that Cenk and I disagree a bit about what it means to not go, whether you should show up and whether you shouldn't, and I'll get to that at the end. But I do want to talk about some of the reasons that have been given by individual congressmen and women about why they plan not to attend the inauguration. So first off, we have Representative Lucille Roybal-Allard of California, who said, "The disparaging remarks the president-elect has made about many groups, including women, Mexicans, and Muslims, are deeply contrary to my values. As a result, I will not be attending the inauguration." And we're going to see a few other people with similar comments to that. And I would say that that's probably the most common explanation being given by those Democrats who've put out statements about why they're not attending. It's that the specific attacks that he has made against members of certain communities, they simply cannot be there and legitimize that with their presence. Let's see. Representative Mark Takano said, quote, "all talk, no action," referring to what Donald Trump said about John Lewis. He said, "I stand with Representative John Lewis and I will not be attending the inauguration." That had over 15,000 retweets, by the way. Ted Lieu of California said, "For me, the personal decision not to attend inauguration is quite simple. Do I stand with Donald Trump or do I stand with John Lewis? I am standing with John Lewis." And so that's an example of a couple of the Democrats, and there are more, who are specifically citing John Lewis's boycott of the inauguration as their reason for not going. And I do think that there would be people who would not show up if not for John Lewis and what he did and what he said, but I do think that that has massively increased the numbers. People always say he's the conscience of the Congress, and so people pay attention to what he does, and sometimes it gets other representatives to rethink what they were planning on doing or saying. Representative Gerald Nadler of New York said, "The rhetoric and actions of Donald Trump have been so far beyond the pale, so disturbing and disheartening, and his continued failure to address his conflicts of interest have been so offensive, I cannot in good conscience participate in this honored and revered democratic tradition of the peaceful transfer of power." There was a bit more to his statement, but he also mentioned the conflicts of interest. And I think for a lot of Americans, the fear that this guy is going to waltz into the White House and begin to rob our country blind, it's difficult to simply stand there in the stands and clap as a parade goes by if you believe that this person is planning to defraud and rob the country. Representative Nydia Velasquez said, "I will not be attending inauguration of real Donald Trump, but will participate in the Women's March on January 21st. And so there, it's sort of going a step beyond just saying I'm not going to show up to the inauguration. It's saying, oh, I'm going to be around and I'm going to be participating in events. I'm just not going to be participating in his event. And I do imagine many will be at that Women's March. I will be at the LA edition of the Women's March this Saturday as well. And so I understand her desire. Representative Barbara Lee said, "Donald Trump has proven that his administration will normalize the most extreme fringes of the Republican Party. On Inauguration Day, I will not be celebrating. I will be organizing and preparing for resistance," which I think for a lot of people is what they'd like them to do. There were two others that I saw that were interesting. Maxine Waters says, "I do not honor this man. I do not respect this man," about Donald Trump. And then there was Karen Bass, I believe of California, who had a Twitter poll, and 85% of the respondents said that she should not go to the inauguration. So I want to turn to that for just a minute, because it's easy for some people to say, well, you have to go, or some people to say, well, you can't go. But of course, they are, at least in some way, responsible to their constituents. And I have no idea, or necessarily reason to believe that the poll was limited to her constituents, or that it's really representative of anything. It's a poll on Twitter. What does it really mean? But 85% said that she shouldn't go, and I imagine she's probably also paying attention to people who've been calling in, writing in, and all that for her office. And so, at a certain point, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. After all, you remember a couple of weeks ago when it was announced that Hillary Clinton would be attending the inauguration. How did people respond to that? Did they say, oh, she is simply following on with the tradition of honoring the incoming president and all of that? No, they said, look at this fucking hack. She's going to sit there after all he did, and she's going to say that it's okay, basically, by her presence. On the other hand, if you don't go, well, then you're being, you're not upholding the democratic traditions, and you're being as bad as the Republicans were when they tried to delegitimize Barack Obama 8 years ago, and aren't you part of the problem? And so you're really screwed regardless of what you do. And so I understand why some of the representatives would at least want to factor in the apparent stated desires of their constituents and then decide accordingly. But really, what should you do? I mean, look, I can't speak for any of them. Obviously, I'm not going to try to speak for John Lewis specifically. But I think, yeah, if it was up to me, I don't think that I could go. I don't think that I could do it. I mean, I don't have that option. I wasn't invited. I'm going to be here doing 12 hours of live coverage of the inauguration and the night before. But I don't think that I could do it. I mean, look, after all that we saw him do in the primary, this is not the same as normal elections, whether it's an election that brings in a Republican or that brings in a Democrat. There were people who vigorously disagreed with Barack Obama. Barack Obama did not get elected on attacking groups of Americans or foreigners. He didn't say, here's who we're going to ban, here's who we're going to kick out. He didn't say any of that. George W. Bush, the previous Republican president, now he ended up being a disaster, but he didn't campaign on being a disaster. In fact, he tried to cloak his actual views in what was called then compassionate conservatism, which now seems quaint compared to Trumpian conservatism, which is anything but compassionate. We had reason to think that he would pass tax cuts and all of that. We had policy disagreements, but he didn't run on hatred and vilifying groups of Americans. This is not the same. And whether we like it or not, if you stand along the path of the parade, if you sit in the stands, if you go to the parties, you are to some extent normalizing this. What was previously referred to in one of these statements as the most extreme fringe of the Republican Party. You are, by your very presence, saying, this is the normal way of things. I don't see anything distinct or threatening or worrying about what's going on. But we do see those things. If you've been paying attention to his statements and what he's done during his transition, there is reason to be scared, to be worried. And to say to all those groups, by your presence, I really want to go to a party, or I'm worried about being criticized. Since when is that what politicians are supposed to be worried about? Is whether they get criticized for taking a moral stand on something that they care strongly about. Look, if people want to show up, they're going to show up. And I assume it is a very tough decision for any member of Congress or someone who's just been invited and isn't an elected official of the United States to show up. That's hard, and I am not judging them. I'm saying for me, I couldn't do it. I think that the resistance has to start now. I am extremely worried about what Donald Trump is going to do to this country, and the nominee hearings that we've seen over the past week and a half have not reassured me at all. I think he is gearing up to do major giveaways to some of his international allies. I won't say who because I don't want people to go crazy. And I think he is going to rob us blind for his personal enrichment and the enrichment of his family. Were I to stand in the stands, I would be saying that's okay, and I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with that. And so anyway, that's just why I wanted to do this follow-on from yesterday's show. We didn't get time to get to these quotes. There will be more, and God knows by Friday it could be 100 members. It could be 150. We could have senators going as well. And so we will check in on that and let you know on this Friday's Power Panel. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, you want to see more, obviously subscribe to the Young Turks, although you probably wouldn't be seeing the notification of this live video if you hadn't already done that. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/thinktank for non-political content, or youtube.com/John Idarola for my personal political and news-focused videos, where I do a little bit of news analysis. Also, I'm on Twitter at John Idarola. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Let me know what you think in the comments.